Is the microphone working? Now I can hello you. Hello, good evening. My name is Daniel Medin. It's lovely to welcome you here. It's an absolute privilege and an honor to be here with Mircea Cărtărescu, who is, to my mind, one of the most exciting novelists working today. And I've been reading him for years, and we've had conversations before, but this is a wonderful moment in which it's possible to talk about a new work of fiction that he's published recently, and we'll largely be discussing. There are several books that have been published between French and English in recent years, and I'd like to keep things open so that we can flexibly move around as in the direction that the conversation takes. And I thought that I would begin with well, a compliment. One other thing that I like about his fiction, because it's immediately apparent when you pick up almost any of his books that, I can stop talking in the third person, I can address you directly, is that you are a deliciously voracious reader. You write work by somebody who, the passion for reading, and not just the passion, but the absolute need for it, is something that I find not just stimulating, but it creates a form of vitality in the writing itself. And it's a writing that is in conversation with so many other forms of writing, which goes from high literature to all the way down. I think of an anecdote very quickly, and I don't remember if it was Roberto Bolaño or Cervantes, but the notion was that one of them, probably both of them, were so obsessed with reading that they would even read things written on scraps of paper that would be floating around in the wind. And when reading Cărtărescu, I think you have the sense of someone who does this, and then he creates worlds in his fiction that make you want to disappear into them yourself as a reader. And so I thought we might begin with something more concrete than the world of reading and what happens in the imagination, which we'll get to. And I wanted to begin with a little quotation. Henry James once claimed that it takes a great deal of history to produce a little literature. And you come from a part of the world, Central Europe, you can say East Central Europe, Romania, where there has been a lot of history, and where there has been an extraordinary generation of writers born right after the Second World War who have created entirely different bodies of work that are immensely compelling. And so I wanted to begin by asking you about the relation, as you've experienced it as a writer, from a personal point of view, not in relation to those other writers of this generation, whether in Hungary or in Poland or elsewhere. The presence of history in your own consciousness as a writer.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your first very thoughtful question. Yes, I would say there's a boom of literature in the Eastern Europe right now. It's no wonder that two Hungarian writers won the Booker Prize and the Nobel Prize recently. That Olga Tokarczuk is another great writer from this region, that some Romanian writers, some Polish, some Ukrainian writers, some writers from the former Yugoslavia are now, in my opinion, among the greatest writers in the world. There's a kind of a boom, and I can only hope that the literary world will have the wisdom to see and recognize it, like they had the wisdom to accept and produce, in a way, the great boom of the Latin American literature 40 or 50 years ago. I'm very proud to be a part of this movement, which maybe has its explanations and its roots in some previous things happening in the period between the wars in the Eastern and Central Europe and so on, during the war and post-war. For example, the fantastic literature, modernist literature of Austria, in the period between the wars. It's the classics of modernity are not only the British and the American ones that we all know, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Virginia Woolf, and so on, James Joyce, but also the fantastic writers of the Central Europe, which were part of the Campania by that time, and were all of them against it. So I think coming a long way from those writers like Musil, like Heimito von Doderer, and many others, Kafka himself, in a way, even Canetti, and so on. There's a long way, but a solid tradition that led the European literature to the boom that I talked now. I feel myself very much indebted to a fantastic line of writers, starting with Kafka, then Bruno Schulz in Poland, then a little less known, but a writer as good from Romania, Max Blecher. So I wrote in this direction, and I'm very happy that I can confess this to have such marvelous predecessors.
But how did you discover them? I suppose you must have just been, because you were fairly autodidactic as a reader. Did you encounter these writers of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire in, I suppose it would have been translation into Romanian? Would you have this been while you were discovering, as it were, your origins?
Transylvania was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the other parts of Romania were in between empires, in between the Austrian, the Russian, and the Turkish Empire. But to tell you the truth, it's not the only direction that I follow in my readings. I'm an omnivorous reader. I don't care too much about where a writer was born, from which region of the world he or she comes, or in which time they lived. I'm reading good writers, and I refuse to read bad writers, actually. This is the most basic distinction I do among writers, not geographical distinctions, not distinctions of historic periods. And how can I tell a good writer from a bad writer? From the first phrase of a book. If I read the first phrase and I nod, I accept it, I say, it's okay. So far, with the first 5 lines, I know it's a good writer, and I go to the end of his book or of her book. But if I cannot read the first phrase, I drop the book, and I think this is not my world. Maybe some other people will like him, but I don't.
I was thinking about what Patrick Lohmann said in the last conversation about, the analyst, or in trying to look as a psychiatrist at the patient, you listen and within 45 seconds, you have a preliminary judgment. And then the rest of the conversation is confirming what that preliminary judgment is. And I thought, oh, that's what happens when I read a book. It's a very similar experience in terms of all experiences brought to bear, even in that very first sentence and what you encounter there.
I try to identify the 45 seconds.
So there's a car that's blocking.
It's okay. I just need
We're going to get to
pause here.
postmodernism and interruption in a moment. Like, it's a little preview.
So talking about those famous 45 seconds, I try to remember when I decided to become a writer. Which were my 45 seconds to decide, necessary to decide? And I cannot find them anywhere. I cannot find them anywhere. I think a writer does not decide. There's something else deciding for them. A writer is born a writer. An artist is born an artist. So maybe the 45 seconds were in the womb, were when you were only a fetus in your mother's womb. I really don't know. But what I can tell you is that reading and writing are the two faces of the medal. You cannot be only a writer without being a great reader. I consider myself a great reader before being a writer. This is my job, to read books. If I try to classify my memories along the time, I always find myself with a book open in front of me. My very first memory, when I was about 2 years old, is that I was in the lap of my mother, and my mother was keeping a big book, a book for children, illustrated book, a very big book in front of us, and she was reading to me. This is my first memory, my archetypal memory, and this first memory actually was to be reiterated, recognized along my life over and over. Even now, if you ask me what's on my mind, it's a book. It's a book. It's my book that I'm working on, and it's another book that I'm reading right now. So I'm very happy to define myself as a person in the galaxy, in the Gutenberg galaxy. I know that it's a bit obsolete, and the AI prepares us for other uncharted territories, but I'm happy that my life turned around the book like our planet turns around the sun.
Can we maybe begin small before we go galactic and start with Romania, with both the history and the language that you would have experienced before anything else? I'm partly curious because your books don't attempt to tell history, although, and we will talk about, I hope, a little bit about Theodoros, which is a kind of pseudo-historical book and plays with history throughout. But at the same time, in books like Blinding and elsewhere, the entire communist regime, and in particular, without being directly about Ceausescu, for example, one has a very strong sense of it informing the environment and the atmosphere of the work and the things that are discussed in it. And of course, Romanian, from what I understand, this recent novel is supposedly untranslatable because of the way that Romanian is used in the original too. So, and one last point, and I suppose you can respond in any way because these seem to be observations rather than questions. I suppose would consider, well, we have the Romanian language, and then we also have the place of Bucharest within your work. And in Solenoid and in Blinding and Orbitor, there are pages upon pages of that seem where Bucharest is absolutely the muse.
Well, I hate Ceausescu even more now than I hated him when he was living. Just because, you always get questions about him. Even now, after 35 years after he was executed during the Romanian Revolution, many people keep asking you about Ceausescu, about Securitate, about Romania of that time, about the orphanages and so on. It's very important. It's extraordinarily important to talk about it, but not only about it. So I think that any writer should have, besides their own history, their own slice of history where they were living, their time and so on, would be also asked about everything that a normal writer is asked about. What about pain? What about suffering? What about love? What about hatred? What about everything that makes us human? Not only about where you were born, what experience you had, and so on. So I prefer to be seen as a universal writer, a writer like everyone from Homer and Sappho till today. To share my experiences that I had with my books, to share my experience that I had by writing them, and so on. Of course, I was born in a dictatorship. I was born in a dictatorship, but I didn't care too much about it. I suffered like all my compatriots. I suffered of hunger, of cold, of fear, and so on. Of course, I have terrible nightmares, even today, about that time. But I always lived in, let's say, in Rilke more than in Romania. I lived in Dostoevsky more than under the dictatorship. By that time, we were very young. I was part of a group of writers who met in literary circles underground, who were marginalized, who were persecuted, but who were so happy to live in the universal literature, to read the verses of Allen Ginsberg, to read the verses of Gary Snyder, to read the work of Wittgenstein, to read the great philosophy, the great literature, the great psychology of the world. We lived in culture. This was our way to resist of the ugliness and the murderous times that we experienced. We became, after the terrible times were over, we became professors at the universities. I taught literature for the most part of my life, for 40 years, in Bucharest, in Vienna, in Berlin, in New York, in Amsterdam. So my life turns around not my own history. My own history is there, and it can wait. It can wait. I wrote about it. I'm dreaming. I have nightmares about it. But literature was my life. Literature was always my life. By that time, we laughed with Don Quixote and we cried with Anna Karenina. Not only the writers, but all the people in the streets were condemned to read great literature because we didn't have entertainment by that time. Nobody was watching TV. Only Ceausescu was on the TV and his wife. Nobody went to the clubs because there were no clubs, no disco, no nothing. Nobody played computer games because they weren't, but the Atari, very primitive computer games. Everyone was terribly bored and lived in pain and in fear. So even the most ordinary people, the peasants and the working class, were reading Tolstoy, were reading Dostoevsky, were reading other writers, Balzac, for example, because this was the only way of entertainment which was possible in the communist Romania by that time. Fortunately, there were libraries where they had classics. There were collections of modern literature. You had stuff to read, but only masterpieces. It's a huge paradox. Even the ordinary people in Romania read the greatest books of humanity. I don't know if they understood it, they understood them, but they had to read them because there was no erotic literature, no science fiction literature, no popular literature.
Is this working there? I understand that many of the translations of these classics were often quite good. I know into Russian, into different Slavic languages, that these were outstanding.
In the 80s, where I had my studies, there was an opening of the regime towards the modern Western literature. So most of the novels, poems and so on, which made waves in the West by that time, were immediately translated. Of course, if they were not against the communist regime and so on, but most of them, they were translated. The other side was that all of them were censored. Yeah. All of them. By that time, everything was censored in Romania, including the cooking books, because the previous people talked about chefs, yeah. Even the cooking books, even the books for children, everything was censored. I remember that in the 80s, 85 or 86, Umberto Eco came to Bucharest. He was invited by the Writers Union in Romania. And when he was in the big room, of course, all the writers came to meet him. One of my colleagues, a very young poet, just stood and said, "Mr. Eco, are you aware of the fact that 40 pages were taken out from your Name of the Rose?" And he was amazed and said, "But why? The Name of the Rose has nothing against the communists, nothing that someone sane would censor it." And my colleague continued and said, "You are not something special. Everything is censored in Romania."
Well, I think you've already touched upon some of what might be considered a common inheritance with your peer writers from Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, Czechia, the Balkans, etc. What's interesting to me about the generation is that so much of life was closed until 1989. It varies depending where you are. And then all of a sudden, having grown up and been formed within those environments, the walls come down. And first, there's a world that's overturned, and I think that's a profound experience. It must be a profound experience in your 20s or 30s to have the state that you were born in suddenly dissolved or transformed radically. The rules change. And then I think also travel. I think the possibility of travel, you discussed these different places that you've taught, must also be transformative, but even more so transformative if you've never been allowed to do that beforehand. But this is me thinking aloud. Because when I think about what's kind of common between the experience of your generation, of Eastern Central European writers, I think of historical irony, I think of dark vision and humor, a very deep, rich and deep vein of irony, experience of, let's say, a lack of illusions, so perceptiveness in terms of history, a profound and non-commercial belief in literature. I wanted to, because there's the belief that literature matters and that it counts, and at the same time that it's not just something that is of a vocation by which you make a living. You've already suggested as much. You said I was a writer probably in the womb. It's not just a question of something that, and I think in Solenoid, which is partly purports to be the diary of someone, right? Is you don't have to publish to be a writer. I think that's evident here.
It's very important what you said right now, because this non-commercial vision on arts, and in our case on literature, was fundamental for the arts developed in the Eastern Europe. While in the States, for example, everything is commercial. And the non-commercial writers are marginalized, and they except some of them, most of them don't really matter. In the East, all the important writers are absolutely non-commercial. They never think of money, of glory, of power, of all those circuits of dirtiness and ugliness that we all know. They are idealistic writers. They write only for themselves. They write for themselves and the people who are similar to them, who think like them. They only write for the sake of writing, for the pleasure of writing. I don't know any writer from my country, from Poland, from Hungary, whoever thinks of getting something from their art. Yes, they get it. They get the art itself, and they are very pleased with this. I think the writers from that region and other kind of writers, for example, the writers from the Latin America, are much happier than the writers from the West, because they are not sold to the publishers, to the agents, to all kinds of, well, they are not playing the game. They are not playing the game. They refuse to play the game. They write for the sake of writing. I write for, not for today or for tomorrow. I write for Homer. I write for Dante. I write for Rilke. Whenever I write a phrase, I wonder, would Homer like this phrase? Would Dante like this verse, these lines in a poem? And this is so beautiful, so idealistic, so, I don't know, out of this world. And this is why I love the great Latin American writers, like you mentioned Bolaño and so on, Marquez and Vargas Llosa and so on, and Sabato. He's my hero. Sabato is the best of the best, next to Kafka, of course, in my pantheon, in my inner pantheon. All of them were writing to express human suffering, human joy, human way of living, and so on. And they also wrote for showing what is dirty in the world, the tyrants, because this is the topic of our meetings, the madness of the world, the crime, the folly of this world. And they did it with Swiftian satire, with irony, but also with pamphlet-like attitude. And this is also wonderful.
I'd like to get into history and madness and tyranny, and I think Theodoros is a good way to do so. I want to ask one last question that, or at least one question that concerns form, because I find your fiction, and this is true of many of these other writers, Krasnorka, we can go on, there's a list of these contemporary, Dubravku, Grejic, et cetera, who are adamantly anti-realist. And when I talk about style and form, I mean there's a distinct refusal of socialist realist narrative. or even any version of conventional realist narrative, which is one of many forms of storytelling. And I find that, for example, your fiction inhabits a sort of dream state. There's a hovering between descriptions that are nearly documentary and microscopic in their precision, and yet surreal at the same time in their execution. And so for the reader, they wondrously blur borders between what seems to be reality and irreality, between reason and what might be unreason or madness, between a waking state and a dream state. These are supposed to be oppositions, but they're woven together in your work like a dream. And I think there's one particular image in Solenoid that is a kind of visualization, I think, of what you've done in form. In the book, the solenoids are these kinds of electromagnetic coils under the earth, and the character has a bed that is above it, and he makes love with his partner, and they levitate as they're making love. And that levitation, that what I was calling before, this kind of blurring, it seems to me, it's a rejection of what might, in the waking state, one might say is realism, and yet at the same time, the works do present the world as it is. They do present dreamlike states as they are, because so much of our experience is also subconscious and indistinct.
In my opinion, there's nothing such a realistic writer or a realistic novel. I never read a realistic novel. All the novels, all fiction is unreal. It's fiction. It's the product of a mind. And by that we come to the difficult, hard question of reality. What is real and what is not real? And this question is at the core of Solenoid, of course. And in that book, the answer is real is what may make us suffer. Only pain is real. All the other things are not real. We feel reality, which is a feeling, it's a sentiment. We feel reality only when we feel pain. For example, when you're dreaming and don't know if something takes place in reality or in a dream, you ask someone to pinch you. And if you feel the pain, you know that you are not dreaming. If you don't, you are in a dream. So the answer there is pain. Pain is what makes the difference between reality and unreality. And in my opinion, all the literature is poetry. All the good literature is poetry. So it's not real. If I don't find poetry, even in the most realistic novel, in Somerset Maugham, or in Balzac, or in other writers which have this aura of realistic writers, if I don't see a drop of poetry there, I'm not interested in it. So all writers are poets, in my opinion, and I would say that not only all writers, but all artists are poets, and I wouldn't say only the artists, but all the people involved in the field of human knowledge are poets, because poetry is the universal grace. It is at the top of every human endeavor. For example, a mathematician would say that one of Euler's formulas is gracious, is beautiful. So there's poetry in it. The quantum physics is poetry, is nothing but poetry. It's so paradoxical, so fantastic. It's a fantastic world. Everything is fields. There's no object there. That I would compare it with poetry. The sapiential books, like the Bhagavad Gita, like the Upanishads, of course they are poetry, pure poetry. The theology is poetry. It's a fantastic idea that there are gods above us and demons under us. And if you consider all the compartments of the human knowledge, of course there are no compartments. The knowledge is one, but from the didactic reasons, we put everything in compartments. But all of them have those, like a pyramid of knowledge, they have those pyramidon, the diamond little pyramid which was at the top of the pyramids. That one is poetry. I think I consider myself very lucky that I have always been a poet. I have always been a poet, not a prose writer, not a writer of academic works, not a journalist. I did all of them, but the core of my literary action is poetry. Even today, the people in Romania consider me a poet first, and some books of poems of mine are considered classic by now. Although abroad, I'm more known from my novels.
Well, it's interesting. You do weave all of these different domains of knowledge into your fiction. By that, I mean biology. I'm the butterfly, for example, which is a recurring motif and theme at every single level of the Orbitor trilogy of mathematics. You seem to almost omnivorous in your integrating these things into the novel form, so that this is, I suppose, what I meant earlier by the more cosmic elements of the fiction that you write. And in this respect, I have to say, because Theodoros, which is recently published in the past year in French, which will eventually appear in English and has recently appeared in German, I was really surprised by it in some ways, because of course it's still your style, and I think, as with the other works, all of the universe is in it, or rather it draws from everything into the universe, and yet it seems a little bit different in that it takes as its kind of point of departure a historical moment, historical individuals, something that's very concrete and can be dated. And although I would still call it an anti-historical novel. I suppose one facile way of comparing things is that if so much of Solenoid and Orbitor is about the consciousness of an individual and what's happening in one individual's mind and the universe that exists within the mind and the fantasy and the dreams of that individual, this has a principal character, but the landscape of the book and the setting of the book is social, it's historical. You have Queen Victoria is in it. You have figures who seem to be absolutely fictional, that are actually historical, that you've integrated. You've done sort of to the historical landscape something that I recall from when I first read Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon, which is he's setting the book in a historical period, he's got these landmarks, but he's having devilish fun interfering with what might be the standard history.
Well, if you consider Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, a crime novel, you can also consider the Theodoros a historical novel. It's the same. In Dostoevsky, everyone can read the crime novel there. There was a crime, a double crime, which was punished. But there was another layer over it, and fewer readers have access to the second layer, which is psychological. It's the drama of Raskolnikov. But there's another layer. The third layer is theologic and metaphysic. And even fewer readers can get there, have the competence to get there. So I think most of the very good books are multi-layered. They can be read by everyone, but not in their integrity, in their totality, but layer by layer. So I can imagine a reader at the beginning of the wonderful art of reading, who is very much pleased with Raskolnikov's destiny, a small Napoleon, a failure of a Napoleon in spe. And then they evolved a bit and become aware of what's in Raskolnikov's mind, that nightmare of being a killer, and then they get to redemption, to the universal redemption. There is someone above him that understands him and forgives him, and so on. It's the same with Theodoros. Theodoros can be read as a normal historical novel. There are facts, very, very well documented, I should say. I worked with a team of 8 historians who checked the facts, all the facts in the novel.
And I should perhaps quickly add that Theodoros is an Ethiopian emperor in the 19th century.
So, and I think any reader could be pleased with this level. But I'm not a historical writer. I'm not at all interested in history. I think history is that nightmare in Joyce's phrase, nightmare you cannot...
Which I'm trying to avoid.
Yeah, yes. And I only play with the conventions of the historical novel. It's a historical novel tongue-in-cheek, or as you said, a meta-historical novel, because I was only interested in fantasy, in the fantastic world, or fantastic multi-worlds in the Everett sense of this novel. So I built my novel. I was very happy to write it because my novel, as you said, this time is not an investigation of my inner life, but it's a thing of beauty, a Fabergé egg, something that stays alone, like a horologe made out of many cogwheels and many springs and many rubies and so on, which in an ideal situation, when I succeeded to do everything like a clock worker in Switzerland here, it should work. It should work, but it should work only if all the pieces work together in a sort of a synergy, in a sort of a self-understanding of their role in the whole in the whole mechanism. It's a mechanism including several worlds aligned over 3,000 years of history. It starts in the times of King Solomon, which who has also been named here before, and it ends in the future, in 2041, when the end of the world will come. I hope I'm not a prophet. I hope we live much more than that. And it spreads in space on 4 continents. So it's a sort of a total novel, I could call it. And I took a huge pleasure to write it. I think if you will get only a quarter of the pleasure I took when writing it, if you read the book, I will be very happy.
I think that's, well, there's one person on the stage who's experienced that. And this is something, because it's a very difficult book to synthesize. I can tell you there are 3 different parts. They cover 3 different moments in this character's life under 3 different names. But part of the absolute delight in the book are the episodes themselves. So he mentions King Solomon. There are multiple scenes involving the arrival of
Queen of Sheba.
The Queen of Sheba to Solomon's Jerusalem. And then he takes as his source a kind of Ethiopian sacred text, which claims that in fact they made a child during that moment. And and he turns it into the narrative. And as a reader, these scenes are so utterly delightful because I hate to use literary reference for this, but this is sort of like the historical novel as experienced by Flaubert and Salammbô. There's such a sensual approach to the particularities, to the kind of wood, to the delight in going into the detail of that environment and the characters and what is going through the Queen of Sheba's mind and what is going through King Solomon's mind. And you get you maybe get an 8-9 page chapter at the first visit, and then 20, 30 pages later, you get another one. And while reading these scenes, this is what I meant, I suppose, at the beginning, that you can sense the pleasure that you had in writing them because there's so much reading that's gone into them and the imagining of them. And even scenes that, to me, seem like fiction. There is someone named Joshua Abraham Norton, and he's an American emperor, and this sounds completely fabricated and part of, maybe a figment of your imagination, but you look him up and, oh, okay. Or even to bring things closer to France, there's a scene in which the Pasha of Algeria meets with a Frenchman who is there, and this is a very fateful meeting, and there's a very fateful moment when a fly lands on the Frenchman and it's swatted on his face, which leads to all of the problems of the 20th century and the French colonialism of Algeria. But it's done with such pleasure and delight, narrative pleasure and delight. I just want to confirm, or at least through my own experience, share that with you in the audience. One of the wonders of reading this book are these sequences of scenes, both historical and imagined.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. You read the book, actually. Not all the moderators can say that. Yes, well, one of my models was evidently Flaubert's historical novel, which is a masterpiece, Salammbô. And another model, which is out of touch, actually, is 100 Years of Solitude. Sometimes I called my novel 50 Years of Solitude because my character only lives for 50 years. But it's a book that doesn't need explanations or description. I think Archibald MacLeish was right when he said a poem should not mean but be. So I feel that my book is actually everything that is around it, is around its own being in itself, is rubbish. I can tell anything about them. I can describe it if you want it. Besides what you said, it's about a character which is called Theodoros, who was born in Wallachia, the southern part of Romania. He was real. He is a character in a very short story of one of our lesser writers. I found the story there, who from the very beginning, when he was a child, had only one absolute obsession. He was mad, he was crazy. He wasn't in his right mind even when he was a child. He had this obsession that someday he will become a great emperor. And when he played with other children, he was always the emperor, and everyone else were his slaves. And this guy who really lived disappears at a certain moment when he was 19. He disappears and nobody knows anything about him. But one of his friends became, after many years, he became our ambassador, the King of Romania ambassador in London. And he makes some diggings in the British Museum's archive. And he finds there the correspondence between King Theodoros II, the great emperor of Abyssinia, and Queen Victoria. And he starts reading the letters. And he is amazed because Theodoros is Theodoros. It's the same name. The face of the king is very similar to the Balkan type of people, not the Ethiopian ones, who were different, had a darker complexion and so on. The formulas, the beginning formula and the end formula of the letters were very usual in Wallachia by that time. So he wondered, could it be true? Could this child fulfill his fantastic dream? Impossible, actually, because he was only the son of some servants. Could he fulfill this fantastic dream to become an emperor, and really became the emperor of Abyssinia? Of course, this is completely untrue in reality, but what is not true in reality can become true in fiction. So I had to invent a mechanism by which Mr. Nobody from Wallachia can grow step by step, climbing stair of the power, steps of power, till he became an emperor. It's at the same time history, but also fairy tale, but also theology, because like in the most important works of humanity, like in Homer, like in Dante, like in Goethe, in Faust, the gods take part in the action in my book. So there are those very many faces of reality, unreality, dreams, obsessions, fiction, madness, crime, and lust, mingling together in this Fabergé egg to make it shine.
And it's an extraordinary achievement, and very fortunate. You are very fortunate, as I've mentioned earlier, that there are such good translators who have been producing these editions in English, French, and German. I'd like to leave a little bit of time for anyone in the public to ask a question. I think we only have about 5 minutes at most, so it's maybe 1 or 2 questions.
It's the lady there. Oh, many people.
So thank you very much. I wanted to just pick up on this latest comment you made on the translations and on the language. I'm reading your books in Italian, and sometimes, I love so much the quality of the writing that I say, "Ooh, I really like to read this in Romanian." So the question to you is, how important is your language, and how do you judge on the quality of the translations?
Thank you for this question. I had an event. I had recently an event in Amsterdam at the Baile, the famous room for cultural meetings, and I was my translator, Jan Willem Bos, my translator in Dutch, was next to me, and somebody asked him how it is to translate Cărtărescu's work, and he did like that. And it was only this gesture. He refused to elaborate. It's terrible to translate. It's such a combination of archaisms, because the story, some of the story takes place in the 19th century. Then of biblical language, because 4 chapters are about King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. My source was not only the Bible doesn't say anything about their story of love, but there's the Ethiopian Bible, Kebra Nagast, which tells the whole story. Then regionalisms of all kinds. In each situation, my characters speak quite a different language. There are 7 letters that my character the tyrant Theodoros sends to his mother, who stayed back in Wallachia. Because my character is not only a very bloody and a dirty tyrant, I wanted to make him a round character, to humanize him a bit, and I allowed him a great love for his mother and for cats. He loved cats. Because I do it too.
Theodoros, c'est moi.
No, I would say only partially, because his most important feature is ambition. But there are two kinds of ambition, a white ambition and a black ambition. To be able to do anything in this world, you need ambition, but a white one, a light one, an ambition full of desire to help the other people, and the dark ambition of the tyrants, the ambition to climb on bodies, on cadavers, till you get to the throne. And when you have the throne, you are not pleased with this. You still want to climb till the throne of God. You want any tyrant, in my opinion, actually wants to become God. And if you get to the throne of God, you are not pleased either, because you have the instinct of climbing. You are not pleased with anything, with no position, with no step of the stair. You want to become more and more and more visible, important, and to crash more and more people under your boots.
And a second question, and then I should say in advance, there will be time. Mircea will be upstairs signing books, and so if you have another question that you couldn't squeeze in, please hold on to it and carry it upstairs.
Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation to both of you. I grew up in Moscow, so I understand perfectly everything you said about the importance of entertainment, which literature was for us. I wanted to ask you, how was the literary translation process organized in Romania when you were growing up? Because in the Soviet Union, we were quite lucky in the sense that many wonderful poets and writers could not be published themselves. In order to earn their living, they were translating. So we had the entire Shakespeare translated by Pasternak, and there are many wonderful examples. Was there something similar in Romania?
Nobody can live out of her or his art in Romania. So most of the artists and writers have to have many jobs to survive. I had all the time, as an example, I had at least 3 jobs to be able to survive. I was a professor at the university all the time, but I also was a journalist, and I worked for some other institutions too. I wonder when I had time to write my books, because my life was very full. Talking about journalism, which is a catastrophe for an artist or a writer. Journalism is like playing ping pong instead of playing court tennis. They are quite similar, but actually there are 2 different sports. Your hand is mutilated when you do journalism. Your hand with which you write literature. So I was forced to write not only cultural journalism, but also political journalism, which is very dangerous. You can imagine in our country, like in all the Eastern countries, most of the politicians are mafia-like people. So they took revenge, of course, against all all the intellectuals that dared to challenge them. And even today, after 30 years or 25 years, since I started to write political journalism, I still feel their hatred and their punishment in many different ways. So I had to do this, not only for making a living, but also for changing my country. It was very important for me and for my colleagues, for all the intellectuals that did that, for giving an impulse to our compatriots towards the human rights, towards democracy, towards Europe, towards everything that is good for the East. So I don't regret it.
Well, I do regret that we have to stop, but there's another event coming up soon. So could everybody please give Mircea an applause?